would you like your child to be attending a public school only to find out that that school district was pushing Islam on your child? We have that and other cases we're going to talk about when we interview in the second half our attorney from the state of Washington. You're going to find it very eye-opening. There's a lot of challenges taking place up there, and you're not going to want to miss it. But in the first half of the show, I want to talk about something that I know many parents are wondering about right now, which is, where should my child go to school? Where should they go to college? Many of them say, well, if they go to a state school, that's often really very affordable, but there's some real spiritual battlegrounds I hear taking place. So then a lot of them think, well, I'll put them in a private Christian school. That'll be safe. I can count on that. Or can you? We have with us here in studio to talk about this a Professor Craig Hawkins from Trinity Law School. He has lots of graduate degrees. I don't want to waste time, but needless to say, he is an expert in terms of public policy, philosophy, and legal concepts, and how all these come together in a Christian worldview. In fact, you just came back from India recently, Craig, and you were interrogated. And apparently the new government there that has been voted in is very hostile towards Christianity. So I appreciate, we'll have to talk another time about what's taking place there in India, but I know, needless to say, we need to be praying for the Christians who are having their churches burned down as we speak in India. I'm very grateful that we have a State Department that has religious freedom as a part of its priorities and is hopefully going to put greater pressure in that regard. But here at home, we have another spiritual battle taking place at universities, colleges, even Christian colleges and universities. Give us a heads up. How concerned should parents be who send their child to a Christian college, has a big cross in front of it, has a chapel service, even has Bible courses? Why should they be concerned?
Might even have Christian in the name of the university, Brad. Yeah, again, thanks for having me back. This is really important because is not our most important commodity, our most prized possession, is it not our children? Ourselves, our spouse, adults thinking of going back to college, and our children, and we think this is important. So certainly we want to be aware and involved in their education. And we often think, well, we'll just send them to a Christian university. They're safe from the big bad wolf of the secular university or state school. But that's not necessarily true. In fact, sometimes it could actually be worse.
Worse? How could it be worse?
Well, I say that is because people let their guard down and they go, oh, I'm at a Christian school and I'm taking a theology class. I'm just going to imbibe everything the professor, Dr. So-and-so says. I can trust this. They're quoting the Bible and whatnot. So that proves that this is gospel. And many times it's not.
Well, there's some universities out there that used to be Christian, like Yale, Harvard, Duke, Princeton, that clearly are not. I mean, we sort of get that. At least hopefully a lot of parents get that. That even if your child academically wants to attend those universities, there is a risk factor that comes into play. But then we have other universities, like say Southern Methodist University. I understand people who go into their theology department, a lot of them come out no longer believing and no longer as believers. And that's not unusual for a lot of these colleges that have a religious sounding name.
Brad, I've known people who've gone to seminary and have come out either not going into ministry and or walked away from their faith because of what they were taught at that seminary.
Yeah, I know of a major seminary here in Southern California, very highly respected. It's not Talbot. Okay, I love Talbot. But I understand, I've been told by pastors who've gone there, they say, if you ever go to seminary, you've got to be really strong in your faith if you go to this seminary because it's really going to challenge you. In other words, you may not believe after you go to this kind of a seminary because it is so liberal in their theology and disrespectful of God's word. And yet that, unfortunately, is becoming all too commonplace on our college campuses.
And sometimes, ironically, you're safer in the philosophy department, probably the place you'd think you'd be the most vulnerable. Sometimes you are literally safer in the philosophy department than you are in the theology department. And so this really is an issue. And you can't just ask, are you Christian? Do you believe in the gospel? Because they almost always say yes. You have to ask, what do you mean by that? What's your understanding of the Christian faith? are you Christian? You can't just ask that question. You have to be specific. And if you're not sure, then contact someone like myself or others who would just gladly, freely help you, give you some questions to ask, to be proactive, and get beyond the veneer, get beyond the mere surface of, oh, of course we're Christian. Of course it's in our name.
Yeah. Now, an example, Wheaton College has long been known as the Christian college. I even thought about going to Wheaton until I discovered that I had to put myself through college. So then I went to Texas A&M, which actually has a lot of Christians, believe it or not. It's a secular school, clearly. But I was looking at Wheaton and thinking it was a solid Christian college, and yet I discovered that today there's a lot of professors there who apparently I've heard don't mind supporting candidates for president that are openly pro-abortion, openly not for a biblical worldview. That's very alarming. I mean, I guess you can even have a board of directors that theoretically have a biblical worldview, and yet has been taken over by professors, or a lot of professors, who don't have a biblical worldview. Is that because of tenure, or how does that happen?
Well, there's a number of ways it happens. That's a great question. But one of the main ways it happens is that the school wants to have status. They always want to rise up in the rankings. And one of the ways you get a higher ranking is where your professors went to, what their degrees are in, what schools, and then their publishing record. And so what happens is many Christian schools, to be academic, to be seen as top tier, they bring in people who do go to first-rate secular schools, and they have a PhD knowledge of whatever their discipline is, whether it's anthropology, psychology, history, philosophy, theology, but they have a grade school Sunday knowledge of the Bible. So their knowledge of the Bible is literally minimal. Many of our kids in grade school know more than they do, but they've been indoctrinated, they've been immersed, and they had to be to get through their doctoral program in, let's say, postmodernism or a number of views that are antithetical to historic Orthodox Christianity. That's one of the main ways this happens, Brad.
Yeah. Now, what about universities like Baylor? They're known for being a Baptist university, okay? They're supposed to be solid Southern Baptist University. And they've had some whiplashing in terms of where they're headed. I mean, they were headed far to the left from they had non-Christian professors teaching there. Then I know of a gentleman on their board who helped clean house, and it seemed to be moving in the right direction. And then, wouldn't you know it, I see recently that students and staff, professors there at Baylor University, objecting and protesting the allowing of a conservative Judeo-biblical worldview speaker to be able to speak on their campus. I mean, as a parent, I could see a real concern sending their child to a school, even if it has Baptist in its name or seems to be conservative, when in reality it has professors that have a worldview that is obviously not a biblical worldview and obviously is one that doesn't respect the importance of the Constitution and the First Amendment.
Well, you just hit on a key term, and I know, and I've heard you in other contexts talk about worldview and how important that is. But I want to come back to that. But for a moment, I went to a top-tier school undergraduate, Secular University, and basically they told me as a philosophy and classical history major, you need to put your big boy pants on, or big pants on, maybe that's sexist, big boy, because here we trash all ideas. So you need to be willing to deal with your views getting trounced. But now the irony is with the snowflakes, it's totally changed around. They want to be protected. And the only thing that's fair game, even somewhere like UC Berkeley, is conservative views where they will just not allow that hate speech to be heard. And so the irony is the bastions of free speech and thought and thinking have actually become the citadels of a closed-mindedness and of really not so much educating, but indoctrinating people in views that are antithetical, completely opposed to Christianity.
Yeah. And I see that so many parents, they want their child to go to the best school that they can that's rated. They want their child to go to a school that's affordable. I get that. But at what cost? I mean, we're talking about, say like UCLA. I mean, that's a great school. It's highly rated, and yet it's extremely heavy in its indoctrination in an anti-Christian worldview.
Yes.
It's very amoral worldview. It's no dispute as to the slant of the professors. And yet we still have parents who are saying, well, okay, I'll sacrifice, but I'll put my child in a quote, Christian school. What are some specific things as they look, assuming they get over the first hurdle of not putting their child in this secular, anti-Christian indoctrinating college that could very well cost their child their soul for eternity? And that may sound a little strong, but I think it's very realistic statistically.
It is.
But what should they be asking themselves to make sure they don't make the second mistake, which is put their child in a Christian school that's really not Christian? Real quick, what are some highlights? And where should they go?
I wish they were all Christian or not. It's basically, and we're not against Christian schools, but we're saying, continue to be cautious. Parent beware, if you will. Be aware and ask questions and stay involved. What do you guys believe? What is the gospel? Again, what do you operate from a Christian worldview when it comes to things like metaphysics, when it comes to what's called epistemology, ethics, the nature of humans and sexuality and gender, and of course the God question? Those are the big five that Ronald Nash mentioned for example, in his book on worldviews. But the parent has to stay involved, and not just getting them in the school, but as they're going through it. Well, here's why. Because one department, again, may be very conservative overall. The history department may be very conservative and not the theology department, or vice versa. Or it may just be a professor or two. But that professor or two can throw a whole monkey wrench into your child's education. So we're not saying don't go to a Christian university, but don't just go there because it says Christian or you think it is. You need to stay involved, ask the questions, and frankly, all the way through your child's education, you need to be asking them, what are you learning? What are they teaching you? And asking questions. It's like a good doctor. How are you feeling? Do you have a sharp pain? Is that in the morning after you eat? Do you have a family history of this? Asking those diagnostic questions will really help protect your child, whether you send them to quote-unquote Christian university or the worst of the secular. And sometimes, I say this advisedly, you're almost safer at the radically secular school because you know what you're going to get. Right. You know the onslaught that's coming your way. But again, they send them to Christian U and they let their guard down, and then they don't have any idea how their kids ended up off the deep end theologically, worldview-wise, and ethically, and so on and so forth.
So even if we're talking about even the top tier Christian schools like Biola University, Patrick Henry College, Liberty University, even Hillsdale, which technically is not a Christian college, but has a fantastic worldview, is absolutely phenomenal. Even if they're looking at some of these outstanding schools, they still need to not keep their guard down. They need to be very much vigilant and aware of what's taking place, interactive, getting to know the professors and the school, etc.
Really, the education process, I'm going to argue, isn't just for your child. It's for you as well. You're going to learn and grow. I say this, I have teenagers, even though I'm a little older, I have teenagers, and my wife and I are very involved in their education. We don't just send them to school. Even when they went to the Christian schools, we were still very involved because even at a relatively very good Christian school, unfortunately, now and then they were taught some things that were unbiblical, that were not in accord with the Christian worldview. We wouldn't have known that if we didn't stay involved. So the parent cannot abdicate their responsibility. Their responsibility, in my opinion, biblically, is to stay involved in their child's education as far as they go.
Yeah, I think that's real solid. And I will tell you, I have two kids who are in high school, and whatever school they go to, I'm going to be involved. And there's not a school out there that is going to be off the list for me to be involved in and checking out and making sure that that school hasn't compromised, especially with regard to the major that my child will be pursuing.
Sure. In the theology class or philosophy class, I'm going to ask something like this. Do you believe Christianity is true? And if they say, well, of course, but what do you mean by that? Because, see, they may mean in a relativistic postmodern sense, what's true for us? It's our narrative. It's our story. There's no grand meta-narrative. There may be ultimate truth, but we can't know it. So we're very humble. It's guised and dressed in humility. But basically, so there's no objective universal truth. These are the things you've got to be looking out for.
Right. Well, Professor Craig Hawkins, thank you so much for being on the show. And keep up your great work in enlightening parents as to what they could face or what their children can face in colleges and universities of today. Thank you again.
Thanks, Brad. Here to help.
My name is Eric Thompson. I'm a father of 8. We live in Hemet, California. It's real nice out here, nice and quiet, not much going on. I like to play guitar and bake bread in my free time. My experience at Moreno Valley College was largely positive. I was hired in 2005, and I really had a great time as a professor there teaching sociology. I like sociology because it's the study of human beings and human behavior and the study of society itself, its changes. The administration had, previous to this, had a problem with my showing a film called Understanding Same-Sex Attraction. This video gives the testimony of 4 or 5 men who they got therapy and they were actually able to see themselves attracted to someone of the opposite sex. I presented both sides of the issue. Is it biological? Is it social? The nature-nurture debate. After the 2014 investigation, there was another investigation in 2015. The Supreme Court was deliberating on the very important Obergefell decision regarding same-sex marriage. In class in 2015, we had a great discussion about this subject. And it largely went well, except for a student of mine, an older student of mine, who objected and eventually left the room. She went to the president of the college, went to several faculty and complained. She thought all along by even discussing Obergefell, we were treading on thin ice in her mind, and she became very offended at our even discussing the topic. And I take a neutral stand when it comes to these sensitive issues, because when we're trying to tease out in their minds what they really believe, it's not good. It's not helpful for me to jump in and say, well, this is what I believe. I was investigated a 3rd time, and that was because of a grade I gave a student. I gave her a D, and she complained that it was because that I thought she was a lesbian, and I didn't even know her identity, her status. Well, I wrote her a letter, emailed her, stating I didn't know she was a lesbian, and wished her well, etc., and asked her if she would reconsider. I also gave a copy to the administration. The administration had me in their office and confiscated my office keys and had me get a few things from my office and escorted me off campus with 2 police officers because they claimed that I had violated an order not to contact the student, which they never gave me. When I got the notice of intent to terminate, I contacted Pacific Justice Institute, Michael Peffer, and he was great. He understood my position, my situation, and he went right to work to help me to sort of get untangled from the mess the district had put me in. Michael wrote a great closing brief, and he was so effective that we, in October, found out that we had won arbitration, and I was granted my job back. So I'm very grateful to PJI, to Michael Peffer. They're an excellent organization, excellent team, and they really stand for justice.
Professor Eric Thompson was fired for doing his job. He was a master about inspiring discussion in a sociology class about important issues. This professor was unjustly treated by the administration, and that's why we at Pacific Justice Institute stepped in. We were honored to represent such an outstanding professor without charge. If you know of someone in a similar situation, have them contact Pacific Justice Institute. We're here to help. And if you'd like to support the Pacific Justice Institute on either a one-time or a monthly basis, you can do it by just going to our website, pji.org, P for Pacific, J for Justice, I for Institute.org. And there you can sign up to become a partner of our ministry. We're a nonprofit totally supported by individuals like you who believe in what we're doing, who appreciate the work we do completely without charge. And we greatly appreciate if you can take the time to go to our website. And while you're there, sign up to get the Legal Insider. It's really helpful. It's a once-a-week update on what we're doing, so you can be praying for our work as well. It's very, very important as we move ahead to deal with serious challenges to freedom and liberty. Now, we have with us on the line one of our attorneys. In fact, he's the attorney who heads up our Washington State office, Jorge Ramos. Jorge, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Brad.
Now, Jorge, you've been actively involved in something that's taking place there in the state of Washington involving a school district that is instructing their teachers to promote Islam, in essence, in outrageous ways. Give us some of the background of what we're dealing with, and then we'll talk about what you're doing on behalf of the Pacific Justice Institute and concerned parents.
Yes, there's a prominent organization who sends letters across the country basically requesting that school districts honor Ramadan in the school districts and provide special treatment to the Muslim students in their schools.
Okay, specifically, what are we talking about when you say, special treatment, acknowledging Ramadan? What exactly are we looking at here?
Well, it would be like saying, he has risen to Christians. They are saying specific Islamic sayings to these students as they walk into class. This is something that was in the letter. Again, we have no certification of exactly what's going on in these schools, but we did receive a letter that a principal sent out to staff that adopted several of the recommendations.
Wow. Okay, so that's serious. I would never expect a teacher in a public school to greet students coming in from Easter or leaving for Easter saying, "He is risen," and all the kids saying, "He is risen indeed." I wouldn't expect that because it's a public school, right?
Correct.
I'm sure most parents probably wouldn't mind it, but even still, I wouldn't expect it. Yet here we're dealing with the sequel to that, teachers, instructors giving religious religious expression to these Muslim students during Ramadan. We're also talking, though, about them having a special room. Is that right? A special place for them to engage in religious prayers throughout the day on a public school grounds. Is that right?
Correct. The letter requests that they be provided with special rooms to pray in honor of Ramadan, as they have several requirements during this time to comply with their strict religious requirements.
Yeah, and this has been thrust upon these teachers to do this. I would like to think that there are, of course, some parents that object to this. Are there?
Yeah, someone contacted me who prefers not to be named at this time, but yes, there are a lot of concerned parents, especially in this one district here north of Seattle.
Yeah, and I want to hone in on what you just said. You said someone who does not prefer to be mentioned at this time, and there's a reason you said that, and the reason, to sort of cut to the chase, is the fact that we're talking here, folks, about the state of Washington. We're talking about the Seattle area. This is a very dark blue area where there's a lot of intimidation, a lot of hostility, and that's why we at the Pacific Justice Institute opened an office there. Not because it's a kumbaya where everyone's on board with us. It's quite the opposite. There's a lot of hostility and persecution against individuals, people in ministry, and even parents who have the courage to stand up against this kind of outrageous endorsements and state actions that are clearly a violating of the First Amendment of the Constitution. Now, what are we doing? What are you doing specifically on behalf of Pacific Justice, on behalf of these parents, Jorge Ramos, as we move ahead?
Yeah, we're gathering all the information. We want to be fully informed. We plan to present a position to the school boards of, either terminating this action in the future as Ramadan is almost over here, or extending the same courtesy to Christian students to be allowed to pray in school, to be allowed to be, greeted in a similar fashion, which we understand they will greatly disagree with. But that's the whole point. They are claiming inclusion with these types of actions, but they really mean to exclude Christians from these types of, blessings or granting of rights.
Right. Yeah. It's what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Religious freedom goes both ways, and the government has to either do the same for everyone or not engage in these kinds of religious affirming kind of activities. I find that very objectionable, and I'm glad you're doing something about it. Something else also I see that's of concern is the LGBTQ Commission. What is that, and what have you done on behalf of Pacific Justice Institute to contest some of the outrageous activity that they're proposing?
Well, this is a bill that's actually been signed here by the governor. It's in effect. It's essentially providing the LGBTQ community I would say, super protected class status, where they will now have a whole commission who is making sure they get extra opportunities, extra protections. And this is something we felt strongly about and drafted a memo to the governor, just really requesting that he don't do this, because we're concerned that people of faith will be relegated. These are supposed to, the Discrimination Act in Washington is supposed to protect all the classes and not grant one class.
Right. That's what, Jorge, that's what really gets me. It's supposed to be anti-discrimination, and yet they only give this special protection to one group. And yet we know, fact of the matter is that Christian students specifically are treated like second-class citizens all the time. That hostility towards people with a Christian worldview, students with a biblical Christian worldview, are put on the back of the bus, if you will, all the time. And so the fact that they would have the audacity to form this special commission to give this special promotion to a group that already has a large dominant presence in public schools throughout the state of Washington, particularly in the Seattle area, and yet not give that same protection to kids who are being stepped on because of their faith or the faith of their family, I think is definitely outrageous, objectionable. And I'm glad you, on behalf of the Pacific Justice Institute, have stood up and have written a memo, I understand, to the governor prior to it being signed, making it very clear our objection to this. Jorge, if there's a parent out there in the state of Washington and they see that their child is being mistreated because of their faith, they're being bullied, if you will. We don't like bullying of any kind to any group anywhere. And so I think that's a strong point I want to get out there. So if a child, though, is being bullied and the parents don't know where to go, and especially particularly because of their faith, they're being bullied because of their faith and belittled, what should they do? Where should they go? What resources do we have at Pacific Justice that could help them, Jorge?
Well, they should contact me directly through the website or our phone number, which we could get to them. But we have a booklet that lays out all their religious freedoms in the school atmosphere. And also, if they give me a call, I've already helped some students here in Washington expressing their religious freedoms and protecting them and their parents from the harassment from the schools. Right.
And to do that, they could go to our website, specifically pji.org. That's P for Pacific, J for Justice, I for Institute.org. And contact us, our office. Also, do you have a number there in the state of Washington, or they can contact you directly?
Yeah, it's a 206-257-3239.
Once again?
206-257-3239.
Excellent. And folks, if you want to support the office there in the state of Washington, we could sure use that. We just opened this office last summer, and we're encouraging people to become a part of our team, particularly there in the state of Washington, so Jorge can continue this important work in defending religious freedom for people throughout the state of Washington and beyond. Jorge, keep up the great work, and thank you for being on this program.
Thank you.
So, folks, there you have it. It's our God-given freedoms we're talking about. Now, let's choose to keep them. I'm Brad Dacus, president of the Pacific Justice Institute. Have a great weekend.